Time for another of our hits of the 60s. For reasons which are about to become clear, Julian Critchley, the novelist and Conservative MP for Aldershot, has chosen Helen Shapiro's 1964 version of the Carole King hit, It Might As Well Rain Until September.
I think I must have heard it for the first time on the car radio. In those days, I had a second-hand light blue Mini Minor, which I was immensely proud, which I later changed to a Mini Cooper. You had to be a very flash young man to have a Mini Cooper. Helen Shapiro would appear on telly, and she made initially a tremendous effect. I mean, here was this rather small, very pretty, dark-haired Jewish girl with a voice like a foghorn.
No weather here has been as nice as it can be, although it doesn't really matter much to me. For all the fun I have while you're so far away, it might as well rain until September.
I thought she was very sexy. I mean, she was extremely young, Helen Shapiro. Probably hovering on the age of consent, I suppose, if truth be told, and extremely bouncy and sexy. It is the great cliché to say that the 60s was the age of liberation, which is true, though. Most clichés are true, which is why they're clichés. And I associate her, looking back, with very short skirts, white boots, long thigh-length boots, and figure-hugging dresses, mainly in pink. But anyway, it was really the short skirts. And all this served as a sort of erotic counterpoint, or backdrop, to the Profumo affair, being in the House of Commons. It all happened in front of me. It was the most incredible scandal with its political consequences. And one had to watch the British people in one of their occasional fits of morality, as Gibbon described it, all becoming holier than thou, and the papers full of Jack Profumo and Christine Keeler and Mandy Rice Davis. And somehow all this went, that sort of slightly sleazy atmosphere, went with the new music and the atmosphere of liberation. George Wigg, who was then a prominent Labour backbencher, hated John Profumo and set out to get Profumo one way or another. And I remember standing in the urinal in the House of Commons next to George Wigg, and he said, "Julian, I've uncovered a massive scandal." "Oh," says I, "what?" "The Secretary of State for War is an active homosexual." You think about it, that was the most stupid remark ever made in the 1960s, because quite clearly he was not an active homosexual, John Profumo. The reverse was true. And I tell that story, which is perfectly true, only to point the moral that George Wigg was after him and that any particular weapon would have done. But the opposition and the gutter press had a field day. All that humbug that the English love, you know. They do like other people's sexual misfortunes, and they relish them, and they savor them. And poor Profumo was martyred. And as a consequence of it, Macmillan government never really recovered its standing, because along with Profumo, or following Profumo, came the whole of That Was the Week That Was, the whole birth of television satire. Now, that was the most revolutionary single thing to happen in the decade. It was not so much minorities of left-wing students making a noose of themselves in Grosvenor Square. It was the new freedom of broadcasting in particular to comment on, make fun of, ridicule the great and the good. In many ways it was long overdue and very refreshing. I think now it's probably been carried to too great an extreme, but in the 60s it was very much what the 60s was about.
I don't need sunny skies for things I have to do, 'cause I stay home the whole day long and think of you. As far as I'm concerned, each day's a rainy day, so it might as well rain until September.
In 1959, I got elected to Parliament at the age of 28. which, believe me, was a thrill and a half. But by 64, I lost my seat. I tried to get it back. It was Rochester and Chatham in 66, failed. And there is nothing so sad as the ex-member of Parliament who wants to get back. The whole of life has been cut off. He feels as if he's had a major operation. He reads about Parliament and he sees his friends making speeches and all his rivals and all his competitors making progress while he has a boring dead-end job. And then from 66 until 1969, did the circuit of trying to persuade Safe Seats to re-adopt me so I could get back into Parliament. And I finally pulled it off in 69 in Aldershot. So by 1969, September, I was back on my feet.
So it might as well rain until September.
So that's really the political background of it. I mean, on a more personal note, I was then, in my early 30s. And I think if I could choose, looking back, an age that I would like to be, the ideal age for a man is the early 30s. There was a great deal of love, but for well-brought-up, middle-class, public school boys, a regimen of cold baths and chapel, plus mother's warnings, had meant that it was some time before I felt fully liberated. You associated the song with a particular girl, and that was true of this one. The woman with whom I was then in love had left England and gone to live in Washington State. And clearly I missed her, and that added to the potency of cheap music. So there was a vibrancy because of that particular message. She's now a blue-haired widow who sells cakes in Market Harbour. But in those days, we were all very different. So that had a resonance, I think, is a fashionable word.
My friends look forward to their picnics on the beach. Yes, everybody loves the summertime.
Picnics, one or two, but the thing I think I can remember best, I joined, or was asked to join, an organization called the Atlantic Association of Young Political Leaders. Gosh, it sounded grand. I became president of it. And this brought together all the bright young politicians of both parties of all the NATO countries. And we could only be brought together, clearly, in congenial southern cities, where the food was good, where they made wine, and where we could all have a jolly good time and be lectured at occasionally on the Cold War. What happened? I remember going to Luxembourg, and we were all put on a paddle steamer. The doors were shut. We were given the German band, an enormous cold buffet. And we would go solemnly backwards and forwards, up and down the Moselle with all the music blaring, all dancing the night away with respectable ladies who are now speakers of European Parliament. The weather here has been as nice as it can be, although it doesn't really matter much to me, for all the fun I have when you're so far away. It might as well rain until September. I can't even get the tune. Couldn't have heard it for 20 years. It's cheerful and it's not too noisy. I think it's rather attractive. I remember running into her in 1982 in Reading, in radio. We both were on the same program. I was on my knees all the time. Here was Helen Shapiro in the studio. And she placed her hands on my head in a rather episcopal manner. And I confessed that I had been a fan of hers. I had to admit about 20 years beforehand, which she paled slightly. She still looked as if she were about 17 or 18. Then I got to my feet. I'm afraid that's all. It's the end. It's a sad end to my affair with Helen Shapiro.
I'm only living for the day you're home to stay, so it might as well rain until September. September, September. Oh, it might as well rain until September.
Julian Critchley's hit of the 60s was It Might As Well Rain Until September, sung there by Helen Shapiro, with a little help from the honourable gentleman himself. The producer was Jane Ray.